Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for our session on migrating to Azure DW from Netezza or Teradata. We've got David Hay on the line to present this session for us. So without further delay, David, I'm going to let you go ahead and jump right into it.
Yep, thank you for that great introduction. My name is David Hay. I'm a practice manager here with Pragmatic Works. I'm formerly a Microsoft TSP, formerly worked at Teradata as a solution architect and MicroStrategy as well. So I kind of have some good insights into this journey that I'm going to take you down today, and it's a pleasure to be here. Kind of want to start off with the world is changing. The reason people are looking to migrate off their Netezza and Teradata platforms into the cloud to something like Azure Data Warehouse is at the rate data is growing and the cost of platforms like Netezza and Teradata with the floor sweeps every 4 years and having to restructure their platform as their business grows, the cost to maintain these platforms and to keep up on them with licensing and the floor sweeps and those things are really kind of pushing things to Azure DW, where it's kind of a pay-as-you-go, so you can start small, you can expand. Companies are starting to adopt that cloud-first strategy for those reasons to get out of the hardware and software business, and then something like the Azure platform gives you great insight into artificial intelligence and machine learning. And with Azure having those pre-built models and having the integration with the other pieces of that solution are really triggering companies to kind of move off into the on-prem world from Netezza and Teradata into something like Azure DW. I always kind of like to start off with different customer situations. I've got 3 of them here, and the fascinating things about these customers is we're looking at them coming off of Teradata and or Netezza in some cases together in projects that are normally 20 plus weeks and over $1 million. We're able to start with the Azure platform, reducing these 3 projects in specific well under 20 weeks and under the budget of $1 million. So it's kind of changing with the Microsoft tools and the things that they have to kind of help expedite the process platform. It used to be pretty difficult with things like data stage jobs and trying to migrate the platform with the schemas and the stored procedures and the different objects. And now with the different solutions that come with Azure and that Microsoft has invested into and the cost to well under $1 million. So with this example, this was a manufacturing customer where they had 2 Netezza data warehouses. They totaled up about 30 terabytes of data. I believe one data warehouse had 10 terabytes, the other had 20. Combined, they had 2,000 data stage jobs with over 1,500 tables. The big thing about this engagement was being able to move these 2 data warehouses in parallel. To get into Azure, they were using Express Route to move the data into Azure DW. And then the key figure here, which with this project, we weren't able to do this project years before up until this year, 2019, because of the amount of data stage jobs, and being able to convert those data stage jobs were very expensive. To have to dig in and convert each of the 2,000 data stage jobs really made this project something that we couldn't undertake. And now with some of the new solutions within the Microsoft platform, instead of having to rewrite the data stage jobs, you're able to amend or abduct those data stage jobs to allow them to work within Azure DW. And that is what's a huge undertaking, which is one of the things that are helping drive these costs down from an ETL's perspective, especially in the IBM environment, who prolifically uses things like data stage. So being able to use data stage and not having to rewrite those jobs and amend them to work with Azure DW has become a game changer. The other thing too is Microsoft has come up with a migration assistant or a migration tool that's going to allow you to migrate your Netezza or Teradata environment and in a quicker fashion where you can migrate the schemas and the store procedures and take that environment and push it into Azure DW without having to go through and do it manually. Right now, the tool success rate is with as much manual work that needs to be done is about 80-20, and we'll dig into this further in the presentation. So these two tools is being able to migrate either the Netezza or Teradata environment, and then being able to use the data stage jobs without having to rewrite them, and then either rewriting them later or keeping them as is, and then going forward using something like Azure Data Factory has really brought the cost down on these projects. And then with this particular one, with this manufacturing customer, with the reports, there were 25,000 reports, not having to go in, rewrite the different reports, just being able to change the connection strings because it was using dynamic SQL. Really, the undertaking of this project was heavy on the testing side, ensuring that the migration tool worked as follows, making sure the data stage jobs worked, and then making sure those reports converted successfully just by changing the connection strings. And with this manufacturing customer, once again, this was a project that was with two Netezza databases, one 20 terabytes and the other 10 terabytes. And with those data stage jobs, we were able to do this well under 20 weeks and under $1 million. The next customer situation we have is a retail customer where their analytical business data warehouse was being migrated to Azure DW. They had one Netezza system and one Teradata system that they wanted to move in parallel. The Netezza system, I believe, had 36 terabytes of data, and the Teradata system contained over 50 terabytes of data. And between the two data warehouses, there were 7,000 ETL jobs for Teradata, and then 1,500 data stage jobs for Netezza. There was 4,000 MicroStrategy reports in conjunction with 50 Tableau reports, and then the connection strings to Azure DW once again would be modified. Here, we were able to take advantage of the Netezza and Teradata tool to migrate the schemas, the store procedures, all the database objects, and then for the data stage jobs, we were able to amend those jobs in order to get them to load the data into Azure DW without having to write those jobs. And by being able to do this in parallel and work with the customer's environment to easily get them to Azure, once again, was another large project that was typically a longer project that we were able to do once again for under $1 million and under 20 weeks. And then kind of the financial industry, you can see here working with another large system of a Netezza system and Teradata system with over 60 terabytes of data, 2,000 tables. 50 of those tables were over 200 plus gigs with over 2 million rows. This one had over 500,000 objects. There was 50 storage procedures with these things running every 24 hours from an ETL perspective, using business objects and Click as a reporting tools with over 50,000 reports. The Teradata system was a smaller one in this case, but the difference one is they took advantage of the Teradata's operational data stores, so they had multiple data stores within their Teradata environment that contained over 250 tables. 5 of them were over 200 plus gig that contained over 2 million rows. There's over 300 objects in the Teradata environment with 100 ETL related batch jobs. So once again, another very large Teradata and Netezza environment that taking advantage of the Azure platform and the solutions that come within it, able to migrate them with success for under relatively high numbers of $1 million in 20 weeks. So when we go in and we talk to customers and start looking into migrating their environment, I always kind of start, understanding why they're trying to move to Azure DW, other than, taking advantage of the cost of the platform and kind of not sinking that money into the Netezza and Teradata platforms. And so when we start talking about these migration journey, I always try to figure out where they sit on the analytical maturity curve for reporting. A lot of times customers with these systems potentially are in this predictive reporting. They could have some analytics built in. Other customers are taking this leap of faith and moving into Azure because they want to start building out their analytical platform. So understanding if they're at this third bubble, which is the data warehouse bubble, where they've actually got their data into the Netezza or the Teradata environment. And then we start taking a look at what their ETL does, and from a standpoint of what their transactional data does, where the business logic is if they have data quality, what kind of, are they doing ETL? Are they doing ETLE? What does their staging environment look like? And take a look into what they're really trying to do if they're trying to get predictive and prescriptive. A customer I helped worked with, for example, Victoria's Secrets, they had a huge Teradata environment. One of the things about them when working with them, they were having trouble getting predictive and prescriptive. They were trying to figure out new ways to make money. So as we were trying to look at their platform and see if taking them to the cloud was the right journey, we were able to start looking at predictive and prescriptive things they could do, like predicting, with their CAD log process, how could we save money and predict who to send CAD logs to, rather than sending CAD logs out to everybody. And one of the challenges they had was, even though they had a data warehouse, their challenge was data quality and master data management. And with a lot of data stage jobs and a lot of data quality business logic not written into the ETL and that approach, they needed to start redefining as they kind of undertook and wanted to go towards a cloud environment. And so me first trying to understand that, yes, they were at this analytical data warehouse bubble, but they wanted to move to these next two stages of predictive and prescriptive, and eventually get them to the point where they're sending out CAD logs to the right people based off certain predictive measures like age, sex, income, a bunch of factors that said, okay, based off this criteria, send CAD logs to these people. Based off this criteria, such as me, who, I don't really wear women's underwear all that much, maybe Halloween or every other Saturday, jokes aside, I wouldn't be the best target for those CAD logs. So really saving them money on who to send those CAD logs to. And then someone like me who may purchase that stuff for my wife is where I don't send me a CAD log, but then I email someone like me a coupon with a reminder and something that would push me to buy, but saving millions of dollars just by breaking it down on who to sell these CAD logs to and who not to, or send the CAD logs to and who not to. And what made it even better was that data quality path I started talking about. I could have potentially been in their system because I would buy once in a while as D. Hay, David G. Hay. So going in, trying to find that single source of record, that golden record of truth, eliminating the other records that are essentially me and not sending me the catalog 3 times. Once we break that down and I understand where they're at on their analytical maturity curve, where they are now, where they're trying to be, as we're going into this process, we start breaking it down. Okay, what are their transactional systems? So I use an architecture diagram like this that I normally whiteboard, and I start documenting their transactional systems that are hitting the Netezza or Teradata platform. And these arrows represent ETL or ELT. So I try to understand potentially from their transactional systems what they are. Are these data movement or ETL jobs? Data stage, are they Informatica? I try to understand what they're using from an ETL perspective so we can figure out how we get to migrate them from this platform into Azure, into the Azure DW. Then are they using, for example, some sort of data lake or data platform for staging where they're doing ELT or the transformation's done here? Then does it move into the integrated data warehouse? If you're a Teradata environment, you could, like Walmart, have a 3-pronged approach where you have your data lake for data science and transformations. They push that data onto what was called Azure, where they have all the statistical models on there. So then the data comes from the data lake onto the Azure environment, where then it does the statistical models and does all the analytics. If the analytics proves out a hypothesis, it then moves up into the integrated data warehouse for reporting. So we really take the time to understand what it is they're trying to do and what they have. So in some of those customer examples that I've talked about, these arrows could be data stage jobs. They could be using some sort of data lake in a Netezza environment that pushes in to eventually the Netezza data warehouse or the Teradata warehouse. So if I know they have data stage jobs, I can automatically undergo that we could use the Microsoft solution that will allow us to amend those data stage jobs to work with it. If they're using like something like Informatica, who works with both Azure and Netezza and Teradata. Once again, those are jobs we can amend and take advantage of certain solutions. We also then understand, okay, where do we use the migration tool? So as I use those customer examples, we look at the number of objects, the stored procedures, how much data, the users, and then being able to use the migration tool to create the data warehouse that was in the Netezza or Teradata into the Azure DW environment. And then we use like something like ExpressRoute that will then allow us to move the bulk data at once to get the environment up and running. And then it's ready to use for their reporting platform. And then if they're trying to get things like predictive and prescriptive, whether it's the data mining or Azure Machine Learning Studio, we can kind of start taking advantage of those features that whatever organization we're working with are trying to use. So we literally map out what are those source systems that are going in to their current environment. Do those source systems have some sort of business logic where data quality and data cleansing is being done at this transactional level? If not, and they're being done at the ETL level and a bunch of logic's written into the ETL, or they're doing it on a staging area, once we really understand that environment, we can start scoping out the work and start taking advantage of the tools that from an ETL and a data warehouse migration standpoint. Once we understand that, then it's about understanding the Azure platform. In this case, moving to the cloud, we're talking about Azure Data Warehouse. Some customers, if they have smaller instances of Teradata because they bought Teradata because they were a name brand and the 800-pound gorilla in the market, and they have under 4 terabytes of data, maybe we can reduce costs by pushing into something like an Azure SQL database. But for the most part, as we saw in those other customer examples, we go into something like Azure Data Warehouse, where we're using the migration tools from an ETL perspective, from a data warehouse perspective, to migrate those environments. And if we need to use something like data lake or blob storage from a transformation level to write that business logic and do data quality and data cleansing, we can do that. And then this is where we start mapping out. Do we connect their current reporting tools? Some customers that we've worked with, at least 2 of them in the example that I showed you, begin using Power BI, taking advantage of the Power BI licensing structure, licensing method, as well as connecting their current reporting tools like MicroStrategy and Click to their environment. And then it was mapping out how are they going to take advantage of something like Azure Machine Learning Studio and artificial intelligence. And for those that actually, for the customer example that I talked about that had the operational data stores, that was then starting to implementing something like Azure Analysis Services to start individuating out those and to make those individualistic data marts, and then applying the security. So then it's all about trying to provide some sort of solution for the potential customer. For that retail customer, it was simply just defining their transactional systems, ingesting their data. The new ETL was using Azure Data Factory. We kept, as I talked about earlier, keeping the data stage jobs in place and just amending those to load into Azure Data Factory. So they were using Azure Data Factory for new ETL jobs. They were using the data stage jobs that have been amended to work with Azure Data Warehouse. They then had a staging area where they did, did the transformations at the staging area, and then they used Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and then they were able to hook up their reporting environment and do that basic reporting that they were trying to do. The manufacturing company was a little different, where they had some unstructured data that they wanted to start taking advantage of, especially kind of from an IoT perspective, from manufacturing level, getting some of those sensor information and things of that nature. For new, in their case, in the more modern data warehouse structure, they were using Azure Data Factory for new jobs. They amended the data stage jobs, going into blob storage to do the transformations. They were using something like Azure Databricks to which is Azure's version of Spark, or the Spark platform, to then help move some data along the lines using Polybase to bring the structured and unstructured data together, and then being able to use their operational reports. their environment was a little more complex than that traditional data warehouse environment. And you could see where they were, in the first slide I just showed you, they only had to turn on very few features of Azure. It was Azure DW, Power BI that they used, and some Azure Data Factory. Where here you could see they were more advanced, where they were using blob storage, they were using Databricks, using some analysis services for the data stores. So here you could see taking advantage of the Azure platform, not only the migration tools, but pay as you go, turning on analysis services when you needed to, turning on Azure Databricks when you needed to, implementing blob storage. So paying for the pieces that you need when you need them, and not turning them on early, kind of like their on-prem approach where they had to buy everything all at once. And then the third example, you could see they had more real-time analytics going on. It was the financial industry, so important to them was being able to look at credit cards, and from a credit card perspective, who do we give a credit card to, who do we don't give a credit card to. So you can see their environment was even more complex, taking advantage of more of the Azure features. So not only were they able to take advantage of migrating their Teradata environment, their Netezza environment with a migration tool, using the adaption process for the ETL jobs, going new with Azure Data Factory, you can see they turned on more pieces of the Azure environment as they needed them, and as they got prepared for them. So then, so we've kind of talked about, being able to migrate these two environments. So we have going into these plans and talking with customers. As I've kind of gone through, I've drawn out as you can see, I defined what their source systems were. I saw what their current architecture was using that data architect diagram. I understood what the transactional systems were doing. I understood from an ETL perspective where the business logic was. I understood if they were using a data lake for transformations, if they were doing the transformations on the data warehouse. Then I started to map out their architecture, what it would look like in Azure. And this is where we start coming in the tools to use, kind of like we start doing that database and application migration assessment, where, as we talked about, we do the scoping and planning phase through the architecture requirements. So basically using that slide 2 slides ago, where I went through the architecture, I understood the requirements, I understood what they needed. As we started going through and planning out, we did the kind of the migration assessment, where we talked about the complexity, effort, and risk. That's going back to those customer example slides. How many objects do they have? How many tables? How many stored procedures? Is their Teradata environment taking advantage of multiple operational data stores? So really going down and looking at their environment, so we can start understanding what that migration process looks like. So then, when we start taking advantage of the migration tool, and we know how complex, we can see, from that 80-20 standpoint, if we can migrate every 80% of the environment using the migration tool, how complex is that last 20% going to be manually? What's that manual effort look like? And then, from the application conversion standpoint, so as we were talking about, a lot of those times, those are reports. Is that reporting tool using dynamic SQL? If so, is it just a matter of changing those connection strings? A lot of times it is, especially with these newer reporting tools that are out there now, that we can just change the connection strings, make minor updates to the reports, and those reports can be in working day one. And then, are there any applications taking advantage of this? I'm working with customers that instead of using a reporting tool, they've built a .NET application that acts as their reporting tool. And from that standpoint, you'd have to take a look at what that application does and how it integrates into the environment. And then it's going in and using the Azure data, going to doing an overview of the data warehouse migration tool. How does it go through? And as I said, with that 80-20 rule, what can we automate and make simple through the migration process, and what's going to be a more manual effort? So we can use the migration analyzer to look at the complexity of the migration, and then, as we talked about, where the schema converter will go through and help you convert things like the schemas and the business logic. And then we can, there are various ways to migrate the data. In most of these bigger environments. I put it onto a secure box, and then
David, can you hear me? I think we lost you. Hello?
To the perspective. And once we've kind of gone through and tools by Microsoft that allows the migration from Netezza or Azure in a much easier fashion than it is to other cloud environments. That's one of the things about Microsoft that they're spending a lot of time, money, and effort in, is knowing that customers are having a hard time going to the cloud and moving off these Teradata and Netezza environments, because a lot of times you're using data stage or other ETL tools that with 5,000 jobs, having to convert each one of those or rewrite the SQL or do all those types of modifications, it became too costly and projects failed pretty quick, because a bulk of that cost would not be just migrating the data into the new Azure environment, but it's if those schemas didn't come, if the schema procedures were different and they didn't convert from a one-to-one method, if the stored procedures were not working in one environment to the other, being able to bring those objects over where those objects may not exist in the Azure environment, or they exist differently or don't convert one-to-one, was such a challenging and expensive overtaking. That's where Microsoft knew, with these two platforms, with Netezza and Teradata, to invest in these migration tools that went through and made this process a lot easier and more cost effective by cutting those projects down. As I said, it used to be, up until a year and a half, 2 years ago, you couldn't find a project like this of a medium complex environment of Teradata and Netezza that you could do for under $1 million. But because of being able to take advantage of the data stage jobs now loading into Azure DW, and being able to migrate the data with the conversion tools and with the migration assistant, you can now cut those projects time in half, and the cost a lot of times in half or more. That is now making it more palpable for customers to be able to take advantage of the Azure or cloud environment. And it's been a long time where customers have always wanted to take advantage of the pay-as-you-go. They just haven't been able to, because of the upfront cost it took in consulting or hiring man or woman power to do these projects. And so here, I'm always telling customers, as we do these projects, to look at the POC. It's one thing to move into the environment, and as you move into that environment, does it work properly, or how do you know which, when you're looking at your Azure DW, how many DTUs do you need? How high should you turn up? Should you just start out the basic Azure at 100 DTUs, or should you scale up and not use the max of 400? And this is where we talk to customers about POC in your environment. And here, from an ETL perspective, you can see where lower numbers are better, what it looked like with Netezza being in the blue from the ETL times per second, what it looked like. This is what it looked like with Netezza at the DW units of 100. This is what Netezza looked like, and you're talking about this Netezza code for this POC. This was developed by an experienced Netezza SQL DBA, who she had 20 years of experience and had about 10 years working in their environment and rewriting and restructuring and redefining this code. And through this POC, you can see, just by moving the data over and using the migration assistant, how when we just even turn it up to the next level of Azure DW, how well it performs in the Azure DW environment with just moderate work done in a POC environment. And then here, this is on the right, you have the ETL rows per second, where the higher numbers are better. And once again, the Tezza's in the blue, and the different colors are the different Azure DW units you can turn it up to per scale to find out which is the optimal Azure DW environment for your organization. And if we come here, once again, not only from an ETL perspective, but you can see it, from a POC query performance details, where once again, you have, the Netezza in the blue, and then the different colors represent the different Azure data warehousing units. You can see that in the second run, it takes advantage of data caching. So the caveat here, it should be the cache size should be low to live active data in memory, and you can see that the results can improve by doing these various things. So you can see, once again, this environment had a very skilled SQL developer that knew Netezza very well. Once again, she had fine-tuned the code over the course of 10, I believe 8 to 10 years, and it was really well written SQL code. And just by in this POC coming in and moving the data over, using the tools and just adjusting it with the various Azure data warehousing settings, you can see that not only did it work well, but a lot of times it overperformed. And you could see that this company now being able to take advantage of the ETL tools and the migration tools can start taking advantage of the Azure platform and being able to dial it up and dial it back from an as-needed perspective and start saving on costs and not having to pay the Teradata and Netezza prices and doing the floor sweeps and so on. And so, kind of from the Azure Data Migration Surface, it's now allowing you to accelerate your journey to the cloud. It's allowing organizations to come from their on-prem platform and streamline them into a PaaS environment. So in a lot of ways, with these new tools from Microsoft, you're where you would first have to start your journey going from maybe an IaaS perspective, where you'd move your data into a cloud from an infrastructure as a service. Maybe you started on SQL, and then you start versioning it up to the current versions of SQL to at least 2012, going to 2017, and then maybe you move into a PaaS environment. They've now developed these tools where you can start taking advantage, at least from a Netezza and Teradata perspective, where you can start streamlining your journey right into Azure SQL or that PaaS platform. So you can kind of take advantage of the pay-as-you-go. You can take advantage of the security. You can take advantage of all the features within Azure without even bypassing that infrastructure or hybrid cloud approach. And at this point, I'm going to kind of open it up for questions. That's kind of the end of my presentation now. I'm going to kind of have Liz open it up and we can start talking about some of these questions. Did I lose you?
Sorry, I was double muted. That was my fault. Yeah, we have a couple of questions, but if anybody else has questions coming in that they want answered, please feel free to drop them in. So someone, I think, just had more of a statement/question that they were looking at the Azure DW migration tool, but it didn't mention details about Teradata migration, if you knew anything about that.
So the Teradata migration tool is technically not GA yet, but us as Pragmatic Works, we have access to the tool and we're able to start using it in our customer projects. I do believe the migration tool should be coming GA sometime before January. You can't hold me to that. I don't work for Microsoft anymore, so I don't have those insights. But I do know that we are using it. We're able to use it now for certain projects. There's certain tweaks and things that they're doing that will make it GA sometime this year.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Does a non-MS source imply anything other than MS SQL?
Repeat that question.
Does a non-Microsoft source imply anything other than MS SQL?
Yeah. So basically it means anything like non-Microsoft. So Oracle, could be Teradata, could be Netezza, potentially because of things like Cosmos DB and that platform. If there are no SQL environments, Microsoft platform can take advantage of that. So I believe what that means is that it takes advantage of and basically most of Microsoft non-SQL environments. There is a form of the migration.
Okay, great. What is the best
migration tool?
Okay. Okay, you ready for the next
I lost you. Yep.
Okay. What is the best way to migrate 27 terabyte SQL Server database into Azure SQL database managed instance? Do we use a migration tool?
Yeah, I would say using the migration tool is your, because ways I believe you can automate about 80% of the work, and without using the Microsoft tool, and a lot of these projects that I wasn't around to undertake, but I've heard about, that 80% drops down to about, at best case scenario, 50%. You get 50% of the jobs you can migrate through various processes, and then 50% becomes really manual when it comes to a lot of things like schema conversion or stored procedures or things of that nature. So if you're able to take advantage of the Microsoft migration tool, especially for 27 terabytes of data, I would absolutely do so.
Okay, great. I think that is all the questions that we have for now. If you guys do happen to think of any other questions, feel free to email us at Azure Data Week. Oh, wait, see, someone came in. Hold on just one second. So here's the question. One of the problems we saw is lack of support for composite primary key in SQL DW for migration from Teradata. How did Pragmatic handle that in the projects without changing any of the client code?
I probably don't have a great answer for that right now, but that's something, if I have your email address, I can send you out a pretty detailed answer if you'd like.
Okay, we will do that. David, I will send you the attendee's email and the question, so you have that.
Yeah, and I'll formulate a pretty good answer for that. That should help.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this session. We do have now a nice little break in between the next one, so we'll see you on that one. And David, thank you for presenting.
Thank you very much.
All right, have a good one.
With you. Bye.